In this podcast, I'm going to be exploring what it takes to live a life full of adventure and freedom. I'll be interviewing adventurers, explorers, and business owners who have set their life up to have an abundance of choice. And I'm also going to give you the high performance tips and tricks I teach my adventurepreneur clients to have the kind of life they want and be the type of person they wish they were. So if you're not already, subscribe to the show and settle in for another episode of The Freedom Project. Welcome back to the Freedom Project podcast. And after a little bit of a hiatus, we are back and we're off with a bang. Today, I'm joined by Henry Shukman, who is a poet, author, and Zen master in the Sanbo Zen lineage. He is co-founder of the Single Path meditation app, The Way, founder of the Original Love meditation program, and spiritual director Emeritus, I hope I'm saying that right, of the Mountain Cloud Zen Center. His most recent books are Original Love, The Four Inns on the Path of Awakening, and the Zen memoir, One Blade of Grass. He has taught at Google and Harvard Business School, the Institute of American Indian Arts, and Oxford Brookes University, and is the author of several award-winning books of poetry and fiction. His poems have appeared in the New Yorker, Sunday Times, and Financial Times. Henry has an MA from Cambridge and an MLitt from St. Andrews. And today, what we discuss is a framework you can apply to meditation. And I think what this does is it makes meditation so much more intentional, so much more deliberate, and probably from that, so much more effective. I personally am really looking forward to using this framework to help me become a better meditator and ultimately a better person too. So enjoy this podcast with the wonderful Henry Shukman. So Henry, welcome to the show. Like I was saying before, genuinely privileged to be speaking to you, and I'm really looking forward to this. So I think the best place to start is for those people who'll be listening who have a either a cursory knowledge of who you are or like newer in the meditation journey. Could we get like not necessarily a bio, but an understanding of how you arrived where you are now?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's the great
question.
You know? Well, I can tell you my little pocket biography, or just where I'm at. Basically, I've been a meditation teacher for about coming up on 15 years, and I've been a meditator, like doing it pretty much every day for about 35 years, or maybe even a little bit more. I started when I was 24, and it was a lifesaver for me to be meditating. And I learned in this, I'm not going to do, I don't want to get too off track, Tom, but just in a nutshell, I learned in this methodology known as TM, or Transcendental Meditation, that back in the late 80s in London was the main game in town if you wanted to meditate. And it was very expensive, but I was a graduate student and they had a 90% off discount if you were a graduate student. So I thought, what the hell, I'm unhappy enough. Two of my friends do it, and I started doing it. And they said, you got to do their particular method twice a day for 20 minutes, or else don't bother. So I was desperate enough, and I just took that on. I just didn't miss it. Every 20 minutes morning, 20 minutes evening, somehow or other, I did it. And there's a lot to say about why it was so incredibly helpful, but because of that fairly disciplined approach they had, it was really like, if you do less, you're not doing it, you're not really doing it, kind of thing was there. They were hard line about that, which I'm very grateful to them for being, because all through the years I've meditated, whatever practice I've done, I've really taken it to heart that it just has to be daily, because that's where the cumulative benefits can arrive, So, 35 plus years, I've hardly missed a day.
Why do you think it was so important to you at that time? I know there was we can go down the physical route and the mental emotional route as well, but like, can you share why that was so important to you at the time, and why TM really was something you were drawn to?
Yeah, well, sort of physiologically and neurologically, I was kind of messed up. I'd grown up throughout my childhood with a very severe case of eczema. Sometimes body-wide. I was sometimes in hospital, and it didn't clear up as it often does in the course of childhood. Mine just didn't. Into my mid-20s, I still had it, sometimes very severe. And there's psychology that comes with that, because it's ugly, and it can be really quite unpleasant to look at. It itches a lot. It can sometimes hurt quite a bit. And it was, as an infant and a toddler, it hurt to be hugged. So I was I'd adapted in lots of ways in my early childhood and throughout my childhood, I'm sure, and even as a young man, still I had adaptive personas and strategies on board. But my nervous system was fried. And when I started meditating, it had its first consistent chance to really dial down. And the dialing down of my sympathetic nervous system as a stress response, it can also be just active, but it's also is stress. And the dialing up of the parasympathetic nervous system that brings on, relaxation, rest and digest, happy, kind of peaceful, satiated, calm, good feelings. I so needed that. And I think the intervention in the nervous system that meditation brought helped both my physiological challenges. Basically, my skin actually started to get better at that point, slowly. But also, of course, psychologically, started to kind of unwind just enough to even be able to recognize that I was pretty unhappy, which I couldn't, even in being somewhat sort of, I was functional, but not as functional as I could have been in life by any means. But I didn't really stop to think that either that I was kind of actually not really happy, although I clearly wasn't, but I never really stopped to assess that. Or that if I were unhappy, it could mean anything other than that I was kind of failing. I thought, if I'm not feeling good, it's just 100% my fault. It's my bad. I'm the one who's got to sort this out. And actually it's a kind of point of shame almost to be unhappy, But actually, once I started meditating, that whole structure of looking at my own well-being in that kind of lens of like, it's my fault if I'm not enjoying myself. And it's to my shame also that I don't seem to be able to manage life or myself in such a way that I am enjoying life and being productive in the ways I want to be. If I'm failing at that, it's my bad, and I've got to sort it out. And I just, the idea that there could be any kind of diagnostic around it other than you're failing, you fool, But once I started meditating, somehow all of that softened and loosened. And I actually, within some months of starting to meditate, I also started in on some psychotherapy. There was a little group of people I happen to know one or two of them, who had a Saturday morning therapy group for people basically in their 20s, like me. And it took some of the stigma out of therapy and out of being kind of messed up enough to think I might need therapy, and it was a really helpful thing,
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting there's a few points that I found very interesting. One of them is the like psychosomatic, physiological two-way conversation thing that happens. As a bit of my backstory, when I was a kid, I developed heart palpitations. I was temporarily diagnosed with the most positive sounding sudden death syndrome. Luckily it wasn't, hence why I'm still here. But that was the first indication of like that link between anxiety, which was, I believe, the root cause, and that sympathetic parasympathetic conversation, and then ultimately the physiological repercussions. I heard you talking about this with, I think it was your first conversation with Sam Harris. Yeah. And you mentioned about, I think you said something like, I've got all kinds of theories, what's going on there, and you didn't get the opportunity to go into that. But is that got anything more than the the parasympathetic sympathetic thing, or is there anything to that we've missed out there?
That's the heart of it. I think the nervous system is the system that mediates both physiological health and mental health. They're that sort of makes them inseparable. I mean, John Kabat-Zinn, who's the guy who founded mindfulness-based stress reduction, in one of his books and in many of his works, he talks about the new field of, I hope I get this right, psycho-immuno-neurobiology or something like that. That the immune system is very powerfully affected by the load on the nervous system. There's a whole swathe of new research in the last probably decade and a half or so, looking at, for example, what they call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and tracking that, if a child has more than, I forget the number, 2 or 3 ACEs out of a possible 10 or something like that, they can actually see, higher incidence of diabetes, higher incidence of heart attack, higher incidence of cancer in later life. So there seems to be, without an intervention, childhood psychological conditioning or imprints, or the impact on our psychology of childhood experiences, it seems like it can have a really longitudinal, long-term impact on our physiological well-being, unless there's interventions.
Yeah, and
it's totally.
So much of that as well is the feeling of safety as well. From what I've seen and what I've researched, there seems to be do I feel safe in this environment? Do I feel looked after? And that's why we have that sympathetic response to activate us to get out of there or protect ourselves in some way. And it feels like when that is unbalanced, almost be like two sides of the arch. When it's unsupported, it will crumble. It's got to be equal tension between both sides.
That's beautifully put. My dear friend and colleague Rick Hansen, I don't know if you've tracked him, he's a fantastic neuropsychologist, basically. I mean, he talks about the green zone that we've got. He says we essentially, really simplified, we've got 3 brains: a reptile brain, a mammal brain, and a primate brain. And the lizard brain or reptile brain wants to know it's safe, that there aren't threats. And if there aren't immediate threats, it goes green. Otherwise, it's red alert. The mammal brain wants to know it's satiated. It's got its needs met, food and whatever else. And at times reproductive, of course, as well. And if the needs are met, it can go green. And the primate brain needs to know it's connected, because its condition of safety includes connectedness. And if that's there, it goes green. So the happy human has got all 3, and because it feels safe, because it's safe from physical harm, from want or lack or paucity of resources, and it needs to know it's got the connection it needs.
So now thinking about your initial time meditating, how do you think that influenced the nervous system? How do you think, what kind of effects did you initially see? And then what are your opinions on how that happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I mean, if I look at those 3 lenses of my life when I was 24 years old, just before I started meditating, I was definitely safe physically. I wasn't sleeping on the streets at night, in rough parts of town. I was well fed, or sufficiently fed, and I actually had friends, but I was still, it was as if the nervous system had just got jammed in one position of high stress. And probably in terms of, some like work was highly stressful to me, and and there were things that were lacking in some ways that I wanted to get met. But by and large, I wasn't in a place of danger. And yet I was living I felt like I was living hand to mouth in a kind of mortal dread most of the time. And so I think the nervous system, I mean, for sure there's trauma as part of the picture, and it seems like it can get stuck, and then there has to be an intervention to unlock the nervous system and remind it that it can do other things. It doesn't just have to be like the throttle stuck on the floor.
So one of the things that I found very useful with my clients is non-sleep deep rest, which is coming from Yoga Nidra, and that kind of is essentially a body scan in most situations. And I found it to be a great gateway into meditation for people as well. And I usually send them down some kind of app to get them there, and there's an opportunity to plug the way at some point. But that's usually a great way to get into that. I found. What do you think is happening? Particular to meditation, do you think it's a different kind of approach? Do you think there's unique aspects to it that contribute in a something other than the nervous system? Like, what do you think's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, the way I would look at it now is that there are, I think there are broadly. It's a great question because actually, honestly, the TM. They liked you to do 5 minutes of yoga before you did your meditation. And I've often wondered how much that yoga component was actually critical. Because these days, I think...
What kind of yoga was that? Was that just like yin yoga? Was it kind of standard sun salutations?
It wasn't, no, it was much less... It was much easier than even sun salutations. He just kind of rolled around on the floor a bit, basically. Yeah. I mean, in specified ways, loosening the back, rotating the back in different, vertically and side to side. And I can't remember now, but you did a little routine of sort of, there was a bit of a forward bend, a bit of a back bend, a little bit of spinal loosening. And then you did a little bit of pranayama, yogic breathing, just sort of deliberate breathing. I think they did alternate nostril breathing. They did like really filling up the diaphragm or the belly, the chest, the shoulders with air, and then releasing in opposite direction. It was just enough to bring on a bit more body connection. Because actually, Tom, like you, I mean, these days, if someone is stressed out and wanting to learn to meditate, I actually don't think the first thing I would do is say meditate. I'd say get into your body first, even if it's just for a few minutes. Something, maybe a bit of qigong bouncing, or maybe a little bit of gentle yoga that's not going to overstretch you, but just bring some limberness because it feels good stretching, Then sit. But so leaving the question of the body aside, because I tend to agree with you that that's a good way to go. But what I think, TM was a particular system that again, I probably wouldn't be the first one I'd go to for a new meditator. But you have a mantra, which is basically a little sound, some kind of a Sanskrit type word that maybe isn't actually a real word, I'm not sure. But you would repeat this sound in your mind. So, and you're supposed to try to do that, continuously for the 20 minutes you're meditating. Well, of course, you don't, your mind will wander. But they had a nice way of framing that, which was anytime you've been thinking, it's a stress inside you releasing itself. In other words, the thinking is a kind of cognitive correlate of some kind of stress in the body or in the nervous system being released, and it produces this little bubble of thought. So it's an interesting notion, but it made the experience of thinking less of a problem in meditation, because a lot of people get hung up on, well, damn, I'm not meditating, I'm just thinking. And actually, I'm always trying to encourage people not to think of thinking as a problem, because then it'll just be endlessly frustrating. You'll be trying not to think, and thoughts come, and you get more frustrated, and more thoughts come. So the TM sort of little move with thinking was clever. That every time you're thinking, it just means your body's releasing some stress. So don't worry about it, and then you come back to the mantra. So where am I going? All of this meant that it was a good way of interrupting the habituated negative thinking loops that I think I was quite caught in at the age of 24.
It's amazing how that happens by the age of 24. It's amazing that there can be that many stimuli that go, well, we've created that pattern, you've seen it represented so many times around you, you've embodied it yourself into your own internal world.
Yes, I think we're quite good at that.
Normalizing.
Yeah, exactly. And Rick Hansen says, perhaps he's not the originator of this, but the brain is the most conservative organ in the body. With a negativity, the negativity bias that we're wired with, the brain fires 19 times more powerfully with a negative stimulus than it does with a positive one. You can see the evolutionary wisdom in that. It's far more important not to get killed than to find another berry in the bush.
Absolutely. So I really want to get into the structures and the systems that you've said so. But before that, I think that it's a really interesting point. You talk about sitting by the sea. I think you're 19 years old and a moment of something. And I'd love you to talk about that and like why that was so important and salient to you.
Yeah. So in the midst of all this, psychological trouble and actually rather unhappy childhood home that I grew up in, some difficulty with my parents and the skin thing. When I was 18, I was very fortunate. I went away on a gap year and before going to college, and I worked on a ranch in Argentina. And after a few months there, I backpacked basically up the Andes with a friend through Bolivia, and I wrote. I'd been a eager young poet as a teenager. I loved poetry. I loved wandering the countryside around us and sleeping out rough when if it wasn't raining too much, and so it was just fulfillment of a kind of dream to be walking and backpacking and hitchhiking in South America. It was just mind-blowing. And I tried to write a book about it as I went along. And actually that did become my first book. And towards the end of that trip, when I'd been while away, amazingly, my skin had got wonderfully much better, and maybe it's diet, maybe it's, I don't know, a multiple load of factors, the climate, the brilliant bright sun of the Andes and the no yeast, in the bread or something. I don't know. Numerous, no dairy food, various things may have contributed to that. But anyway, it got much better. And so I was much happier, and then I was writing this book and man, I was actually doing it. And I was 19 years old and I'd written a book, and I was very happy. And one afternoon towards the end of the trip, I was on a beach all on my own, just as the sun was about to set. And I was looking at the sunlight moving over the water. And I was just sort of kind of looking at what I was actually seeing. Not so much, I know it's sunlight on water, but what am I actually seeing? And it was like, I realized I was looking at these very bright patches that were moving around. And when they slid off a patch, what was beneath them was very, very dark, almost black. And the question came to my mind, like, well, is the water bright or is it totally dark? It's both, really. And then I thought, but water is actually transparent, it's clear, and air is transparent, and light is also transparent. We just see what light bounces off. And I mean, this may be going in too deep, but I was just pondering, like, well, what's actually going on when I see this sight? And suddenly, I was no longer sort of in my body, looking at this scene outside my body. Instead, it was as if there was just one scene, and I was part of it. I wasn't separate from it. And then it got even deeper. And then, by the way, I was stone cold sober, just in case anyone's wondering. I wasn't into psychedelics or anything, and I wasn't into, I was a healthy young man. I drank occasionally, but of course, but not a lot. And then suddenly it was as if everything kind of disappeared, and there was just a world of sort of an insubstantial fabric of some kind, and that everything was made of. And I felt like I wasn't separate from anything, that I was actually what I really was part of the whole universe. And it was, and then it sort of ended, and I was back. I knew again that I was a person standing on a beach, and at some point I realized that was me again. No, I was back. But once I was back, I just felt this really truly overwhelming feeling of love. Like I'm just swamped by a feeling of love. Like it's as if this whole experience of being alive is just one great love, or something like that. And I'm not a theistic person. I am still an atheist, actually, to this day. But I sort of do believe that somehow, there's something about the experience of being alive in this universe, but that on some other level, it's so thoroughly connected. Everything's so thoroughly connected, and we're part of that level of connectedness, that it is like being held by some universal energy that could be described as being like love, and so I actually believe that, even though I don't believe in some supernatural beings called gods or anything like that. But of course, I respect that others do. I don't personally, in spite of this kind of experience. But that was a really decisive moment in my life for one main reason, which is that I came out of it convinced that what I'd just experienced was real. And that's the part that may be harder to defend. But there was a sense that what I've just seen is more real than the way I ordinarily experience things. So cut forward 10 years, by which time I'd now been meditating for 5 years, and I stumble into another meditation tradition that I just knew understood that experience I'd had on the beach when I was 19. And that was Zen. There was just no question. They not only understood that, it was central to what they tried to teach. And I therefore switched to doing Zen.
So I think that leads us perfectly into the 4 ins, and to say, well, what are we trying to attain with each stage, or what are we trying to develop, and what are the practices? And it's so interesting to hear you say that. I was gifted a copy of Tao Te Ching by a mentor of mine. I was sat on the tube reading it, and I had this amazing experience where I looked up, and I had the moment of, am I going towards the world, or is the world going towards me, as I can look down the tube. And it was I didn't know what it was at all at the time. I couldn't place it. But I was on my way to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu session, and I just remember that walk from the tube to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu session. I was like, something shifted that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I was meditating in an ad hoc fashion at the time. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that I think I previously imagined those kind of experiences to be as almost like a pressure of concentration building up within meditation would lead to that when I generated enough focus. But that was very different. My mind was open and wide and curious. And it sounds like when you were considering the light and the shapes and the colors and and everything that went into that, it was not an intense state. It was a curious one.
That's exactly right. I totally agree. It was like investigating. What is this? Without preconceptions. It's like dropping the preconceptions that I know what it is. And it sounds like you did that when you're coming out of the tube. Somehow, mind's a little bit of jujitsu on your mind from the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah.
So you're kind of open and like, what if I don't know? I've had this sense of knowing how this world works. What if I don't know? What if my preconceptions are only ideas? They're only thoughts. And I could stop those thoughts. What then is this very moment? Gulp. Maybe I don't know. What if I actually don't know what is happening right now? Yeah, I could say, Tom and Henry are having a conversation through a podcast app, on their computers or whatever. That I think I know that's happening. But wait, who really am I? Who really is Tom? And on Tom's side, who am I? And who's this guy called Henry? I mean, all that we really know is we're seeing one another's faces in a screen. I'm seeing a bush outside waving in a wind. I'm not looking at it, but it's in my field of vision. Couple of chairs, curtains. There's this body. I can see the legs and the hands, the arms. But who is it seeing? What is it that all this is arising just the way it is right now? By what means is it arising? If we really come back to what we actually experience, it's always and only experience right now. Even if we're thinking back to, I was just talking about being in South America. But what's actually happening is I'm thinking of something I call South America, others call South America, and I'm talking about it. But where is it now? Where is that experience of, 40 years ago? Where is it now? Who knows? I can think of it now. I can talk about it now, but that doesn't mean it exists somewhere back there. The thinking of it is happening now. The talking about it is happening now. So if I just let go of assumptions, what might happen to my experience? And it sounds like you had one of those foreground, background shifts or something like that, where all of a sudden, I think I'm Tom moving through the world. But what if Tom is in some ways a fiction and what I am is some kind of space and the world's moving through this space? How could I know that wasn't also real? And how do I know which one is more real? I mean, is this on track, Tom?
Absolutely. 100%. The question that comes to mind is 12 years ago, I think I would have thought, and I know there's many people who would be listening to this who may be thinking the same. That's all interesting stuff intellectually, but why is it important to how I live my life? Why is it important to to my experience, which I suppose is the word within it. But like, why does this matter other than like kind of intellectual curiosity?
Yeah, no, I think it goes a lot further than intellectual curiosity. And here's one reason right off the bat why. When we get the sense that our assumptions about who we are only assumptions, if we just get that insight that my assumptions about who I am, who I think I am, is only thoughts, it's only assumptions, then suddenly there's the possibility of not being constrained, constricted, restrained by an idea of who I think I am. And when the constraints of being just this separate person who's had the thread of narrative that I call my life, if I'm not just that tight little bead on a wire that's labeled Henry, that's been along this wire called time all these decades, if that's just an idea, then what am I? Now, what can happen is, even just by framing that question, we might get a little hit of being just so much more connected to the whole of this world. It's like, I mean, what usually, I mean, at some point, somewhere in there, there's this sort of, the heart suddenly feels different. It just gets engaged, and it's sort of, wow, I love this world, or wow, I'm part of this world, or, you know, and if the heart is on and we're feeling it, life's different, and what we do in life will be different. If the heart's off and we're not feeling it, and we're navigating in a very horizontal kind of way, trying to get what we want, trying to avoid what we don't want, and yeah, it's not like that's intrinsically bad. We may be doing very good things. Sometimes we might be drawn into doing things that are harmful without realizing it, or realizing it but thinking it's okay. That's also possible, because, you know, I want to be getting what I want. I don't care so much if it hurts somebody else. But if the heart is switched on, if we're sensing that we're part of something wider, we're not really alone, basically. The idea that we're a separate, isolated entity is fundamentally false. If we get that as a felt experience, life suddenly becomes meaningful. Suddenly there's more of some kind of sense of purpose that isn't just a blind grasping for another goal, you know. It's like, I matter, you know, and the world matters, and other people matter, and I can live. If I can live with love, it's a different world.
That's a phrase to take for the show notes and for the for the promotion of this. I keep on threatening to do it, but let's talk about the four ins. And yes. I think it provides a really nice practical framework and an idea of purpose to session, or intentionality. And I'd love to go through an overview and then to kind of break those down if possible, please.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So in a nutshell, I was getting the sense in the course of, you know, my life as a meditation teacher, that there was a lot of confusion about the terminology, what's awakening, what's mindfulness, what's meditation. And there's a lot of confusion about the different possibilities that meditation offers and the different reasons for meditating. And I wanted to, in a fairly broad, schematic way, provide a map that there are actually, I bet there's other ways to slice and dice it, but I think it's a fairly good one. There's four primary ways we can grow through meditation, or ways that we can develop. And all of them are, in a sense, about our sense of self. You know, in one way or another, they're all concerned with that kind of thing. And of course, because of that, also with others. So the first one is mindfulness. That's what most people know. And we were talking about it earlier. So a lot of it is about dialing down the nervous system and essentially becoming more present, being able to attend to being here, the experience of now, aware of what's going on outside and appreciating it, aware of what's going on inside and appreciating that too, and developing a kinder, wiser attitude to both, so that we're more responsive to those around us, and actually kinder and more responsive to what we may need within us. Self-compassion, I believe, is a really important thing. So there's much more to say, but that's basically mindfulness. And then the second is all about connectivity and support in a nutshell. And it's about feeling deeper connectedness. It's about, sometimes it's just simply about being able to reach out and ask for help. Sometimes it's about being able to reach out and offer help. And it's a sort of, the idea in one part is to undercut the sense that many meditators might have, that taking on a mindfulness practice is a solitary, solo thing. I've got to do it. I'm the only one who can get myself fit in body by going to the gym, by running, whatever. I'm the only one who can get myself fitter in mindfulness. But that's wrong, actually, because the journey of mindfulness is about increasing our connectedness. It's not a solitary thing. It's about really, I always think it's about uncovering our true place in the world more, in the family of humanity and in the family of all animals and in the biosphere even as a whole. We just don't exist independently. We tend to think we do, but we totally don't. We're our million times great grandparents were fish, and without them we wouldn't be here. I'll just finish going quickly through this so we've got the map. Then the third one is about essentially finding flow, getting into flow states. These are states of mind where there's no sense of effort. There's a great sense of ease, where if we're engaged in some activity, even if it's a challenging, difficult one, when we're in flow, we'll be doing it at a higher level of accomplishment than we normally do, and yet finding it strangely easy, and it's very rewarding to be in flow. It just feels fantastic. We feel fulfilled beyond normal ways of feeling fulfilled. And when it happens in meditation, which it can do quite a lot, it's kind of got this added bonus that we're not doing anything outwardly. We're just sitting there, and so I regard it as a really healthy thing to find just how happy we can be with so little. Just to realize that the scrabbling and searching for all the big things we think we want in life, well, it may be even just a little bit misguided, because there are ways of being profoundly happy with extremely little, and that's something just to note for ourselves. The next time we're craving the upgrade on the Tesla or something, it's like, well, actually, what if we can be incredibly happy with just barely enough food and barely enough warmth and dryness? It's just a reminder, when we can get so obsessed with material well-being. And then the fourth one is really, it's what we call awakening, which none of the other three are quite that. Awakening is this radical insight into the sense of self being illusory, that it's not what it appears to be, and therefore our relationship to the world is not what we've thought it was, and what that looks like. That's we can talk about that. We can talk about that another time or later. But That's the basic map. And I wanted people to know, hey, these are 4 somewhat distinct possibilities that meditation offers.
Do you see those as sequential stages? Do you see them as corners to develop individually? Do they support each other? Like, how do you see them relating to each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I would say, like you coming out of the tube, like me on the beach at 19, it kind of proves that the 4th one isn't necessarily the product of the first 3. Unless you'd been meditating very diligently in the years prior to that. I certainly hadn't. I just got hit by this blast of awakening out of the blue. But I suspect that if it had hit me when I was well trained in the other 3 inns, I could have integrated it a whole lot more helpfully than I did. Because in fact, I couldn't integrate it at all. It was just this flash in the pan. A few weeks later, I went home and had a really hard time, and I just wasn't in a state where I could take in the amazing education it had just given me, but to answer the question again a bit more, Tom, let me just think. I mean, here's the thing. Here's how I think about it. Some people just only want one of them, and that's fine. Just go for your mindfulness. Some people really want to do the kind of connectivity work, and it's a little bit more like soul work. And people who get into shamanism, they're kind of in that second zone, typically second in. They're doing the work on that deeper connectivity, and so that's great. Flow, I don't know whether it's so easy to work on that without having at least done some mindfulness first. But then there's lots of people who find flow in their lives, without any meditation, in art or in just in any work. Actually, you can find in any activities you can find flow. And I wanted to. I think in part the purpose of these laying it out in this way was to help clarify what awakening is. That getting into a flow state on a mountain bike is fantastic, but it usually isn't awakening, because you usually haven't had the radical insight into selflessness.
Interesting.
So I think the best thing of all is to develop all of them.
Is there and before I get to that, actually, that reminds me of that phrase that so many people use where they say skiing is my meditation or running is my meditation. But that's, I'm guessing, according to that, flow. I'm guessing they're finding some sort of flow.
Yes, I think so. And they're probably getting some mindfulness as well, because they may be getting interruptions in the stream of thought. So becoming more present. I think that's fine and great. But it's not quite the same as really being on the path of development through meditation, where it's a really, I mean, I know I've had this all along as a meditation teacher. People come in and say, but I do meditate. I'm a massage therapist, and when I'm doing massage, I'm really in this meditative space, and I'm doing that 10 hours a day. Yeah, I mean, there's no denying that, but actually there's a path of a particular kind of development that is slightly different if you're on the meditative path.
I'm well aware you're coming up to time, so I want to bring up 2 subjects and I'll let you know where to, or you can decide where to take these. So the first one is we've spoken about the structure and the discipline and the rigor, I suppose, of having a distinct practice of daily. I'm sure there's a certain amount of time. Is there a minimum effective dose? So that's one question. You can take that one if you want to. The other one is, amongst those 4, is there a Pareto distribution of the sort? Is one of those corners going to provide 80% of the benefit, or is there a way of if you're going to focus on one, is there one that's more valuable than the others?
Okay, first of all, minimum effective dose is going to change as you go. When you start out, I don't recommend people do what I did, actually. I think it's wise to start out with 10 minutes a day. And when that's locked in for, a month or two or something, then by all means, up it if you want to. But it's far more important to be doing it daily than doing a big blast once a week. There are times when it's amazing to go into a retreat. I mean, if you've got a daily practice established, at some point you might try a day-long retreat. At some point you might try a multi-day retreat. It'll boost your daily practice, and they can sort of feed each other. Your daily practice will make the retreat more fruitful and vice versa. So yeah, dosage is very variable, but it depends what you want. Like if somebody who just wants to get some mindfulness into their life, into their busy life, even if they could, it might not be wise to go for a month retreat in a monastery in Thailand. It might not be a good fit for what they really want. And you do hear about people having a bad time with meditation, because I think usually when that happens, it hasn't been the right fit for what they actually wanted, or what they wanted was they weren't patient enough about getting there. A lot of it. Well, I heard from a beautiful monk in Thich Nhat Hanh's lineage. He's a marvelous Vietnamese Zen teacher who died a couple of years ago. This monk said, really each of us is not one person, it's more like we're 50 people. And when you start meditating, one of those 50 might love it and just want to run ahead and leave the others behind. But real change is when all 50 take one step. So I think that's a really nice model, that there's lots of parts of us, and not, some parts of us are really on board, and others are saying, no, I don't like.
It's very Jungian to look at it like that.
Right. So actually, if everybody can agree, let's do a little bit, that's more powerful, and it might. And eventually the one who's so eager will realize that patience is part of the picture, So that was dose.
And then we spoke about Pareto distribution.
Yeah, which one? Yeah. I would say, okay. I think the one that you can't do without is the mindfulness. I think that feeds the other four.
Yeah.
The other three. But, the one that is the biggest game changer by far is the fourth one. The fourth one changes everything, because it changes who you think you are.
Yeah.
The other three might adjust that a bit, but you're still fundamentally still in a world where I'm me in this world. But with the fourth one, that fundamental structure, way of creating experience, that I am definitely Henry in this body, I own this body, it's mine, and the world's out there, that changes. And for that to change is such a big thing. It's like the other three, you're still playing the game where I'm trying to get from A to B in the best way I can, and I want to help others on their A to B journey. And then all of a sudden, that's gone. No more game, no more A to B, no more Henry. We don't know what this is. And it's marvelous beyond measure,
Well, I think...
And it's real.
No, absolutely.
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, I could go on forever.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's a fantastic place to wrap up and to summarize this. Where can people find out more about your work? Where can people follow you? Where can people get your book and your app and all those kind of things?
Yeah, thanks. Well, the best way is to get the way. It's a new app. It's been out 4 months, and it actually takes any user on a journey where they visit all 4 of these zones in a sort of cyclical way. So you get deeper and deeper. I think it's the only map app out there, I think, that doesn't have any choice. Our research was that people are overwhelmed by choice when they open up a meditation app. So we said, okay, actually, we're going to have no choice at all. Every day there's a sit, and you can't do the next one until you've done the prior one. So each day a new one unlocks for you. If you've done the one before, you get the next one, and there's no choice. And it's because we move through these 4 ins, or we call them zones actually in the app, but because we move through them, we think it's a really nice, well-grounded, broad-based, foundational journey into quite deep stuff in meditation.
Perfect. Well, I'm looking forward to checking it out. I'd like to say that I've probably tried more meditation apps than anyone else in the world. Is probably my record. So I haven't encountered one where the choice is made for you about what you're doing. I think that's a really useful thing to have just as a user experience thing. So very much looking forward to trying it out. And fantastic. I really appreciate you joining me. I'll put the link to your books, to your Instagram profile, to anywhere people can follow you in the show notes, and thoroughly appreciate it. Thank you.